Hello, lovely people. Welcome back. All right, so let's talk about the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. Picture this. It's like the principal's office for the entire world. When someone does something really, really bad, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and their own country either can't or won't do anything about it, the ICC is supposed to step in. It was created back in 2002 with this beautiful, optimistic idea that no one, not even a head of state, is above the law. It's based in The Hague in the Netherlands. Its job is to deal with the absolute ugliest parts of human behavior. It's the world's attempt to say, hey, you can't just commit mass atrocities and get away with it. Now, the whole point of the ICC is to be a court of last resort. It's not supposed to be meddling in every country's business. Think of it like this. If your neighbor's kid draws on your fence, you don't call the FBI. You talk to the parents first. But if your neighbor is running a secret fight club in their basement, maybe you call in a higher authority. The ICC is that higher authority for international law. Its goal is noble, to end impunity for the worst crimes imaginable and bring some measure of justice to victims who would otherwise have none. But here's where it gets a little tricky. For the ICC to have power over someone, their country needs to have signed and ratified the Rome Statute, or the United Nations Security Council can refer a case to the court. The problem is, some of the world's biggest players, like the United States, Russia, and China, never signed up. Russia, China. It's like they're helping write the rules for a club they refuse to join. This creates a bit of an imbalance. This has led to a lot of criticism over the years, and that criticism is a huge part of this story. Many people, especially in Africa, have started looking at the ICC and thinking, wait a minute. They see a pattern where African leaders are being prosecuted while leaders from other parts of the world who've done some questionable things get a free pass. So, while the idea of the ICC is beautiful, the execution has been, let's say, controversial. It's this feeling of a selective, biased justice that has been simmering for years. And it's the key to understanding why some countries are now saying thanks but no thanks. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. So, picture the scene. It's September 2025, and the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly is underway in New York. This is the Super Bowl of diplomacy. World leaders put on their best suits, fly in on their private jets, and give speeches about world peace while their motorcades shut down half of Manhattan. It's a place for grand statements, for big promises, and occasionally for some serious drama. Everyone is there to talk about climate change, global health, and all the usual big-ticket items. It's a very formal, very rehearsed affair. Most of the time you know what you're going to get. But then, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, map the Sahel region. These three countries have been going through a lot. They've had coups, they're fighting insurgencies. They've formed a new group called the Alliance of Sahel States. They've been feeling like the international community, especially former colonial powers like France, has been telling them what to do for too long. So when their leaders got their turn to speak at the UNGA, they weren't there to just read a prepared statement about sustainable development goals. They came with a message, and they made sure everyone heard it. One after another, they delivered speeches that were less about diplomatic niceties, and more about drawing a line in the sand. They spoke about sovereignty. They spoke about the right to choose their own partners. They spoke about forging their own destiny without outside interference. And then came the bombshell. They announced, right there on the world's biggest stage, their coordinated intention to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. It wasn't a quiet memo or a press release buried on a Friday afternoon. It was a primetime announcement, a diplomatic mic drop that sent ripples through the entire hall and across the globe. This wasn't just a procedural move, it was a powerful political statement. By doing it at the UNGA, they were ensuring maximum visibility. They weren't just leaving the ICC, they were explaining why they were leaving it, in front of everyone. They were turning their departure into a public trial of the court itself. The move was clearly coordinated, a show of unity from their new alliance. They were saying, in effect, we are tired of a system we believe is broken and biased. We are taking our ball and going home, and we are building our own court. The message was clear. A major shift was happening in Africa, and the old rules no longer applied. First up, let's look at Mali. The Malian transitional president, standing tall at that green marble podium, didn't mince words. His speech was a masterclass in defiance. He framed the decision to leave the ICC as a necessary step to reclaim Mali's national sovereignty. He painted a picture of a country that had been let down by the international systems that were supposed to help it. He argued that for years, Mali had been lectured and sanctioned by outside powers who claimed to have Mali's best interests at heart, but whose actions often made things worse. It was a powerful narrative of a nation taking back control of its own fate. He spoke about the hypocrisy of a court that seemed to only have jurisdiction over the weak, while the powerful operated with impunity. "Justice cannot be a one-way street," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "It cannot be a tool used by the powerful to discipline the global South, while they themselves remain untouchable." He mentioned how Mali had initially joined the ICC with hope, believing it would be an impartial arbiter of justice. But over time, that hope had turned into disillusionment. The court, in Mali's view, had become politicized, an instrument of neo-colonial influence rather than a temple of blind justice. While Mali had initially referred its own situation to the court back in 2012 to investigate crimes committed in the north, the feeling now was that the process was being manipulated. He suggested that the court's focus was selective, ignoring certain actors while targeting others, often in ways that aligned with the geopolitical interests of Western powers. This, he argued, undermined Mali's own efforts at peace and reconciliation. It wasn't just about the principle, it was about the practical, on-the-ground impact of the ICC's presence, which he claimed was more divisive than helpful. Ultimately, Mali's message was one of self-reliance. The president asserted that Mali and its Sahel allies were more than capable of delivering justice for their own people through their own mechanisms. "We will build a justice system that is fair, that is ours, and that serves the needs of our people, not the agendas of others," he said. The withdrawal from the ICC was presented not as an escape from justice, but as a pivot towards a different, more authentic form of it. It was a bold declaration that Mali was done playing by rules it felt were rigged from the start, and it was ready to write its own. Next, it was Niger's turn, and their representative doubled down on the theme of a biased and selective court. His speech was less fiery than Mali's, but just as firm, methodically laying out the case against the ICC. He reminded the world that many African nations, including Niger, had been early, enthusiastic supporters of the ICC. They had believed in the promise of a world where justice was universal. But, he lamented, the reality had fallen far short of that promise. He pointed to a simple, damning statistic. Nearly all of the ICC's official investigations and indictments had been against Africans. "We are forced to ask," he posed to the assembly, "are the world's worst crimes only committed on African soil? Or is the lens of international justice simply pointed in one direction?" This question hung in the air, a direct challenge to the court's legitimacy. He argued that this Africa-centric focus was not a coincidence but a feature of a global power structure viewed through a colonial lens. The ICC, he implied, had become the legal arm of this structure, a tool for keeping African nations in line while powerful Western countries, which were not even members, were free to engage in military interventions without fear of prosecution. The representative from Niger also touched on the idea of procedural fairness. He described a feeling that the office of the prosecutor was susceptible to political pressure from the powerful nations that fund a large portion of the UN's budget. He suggested decisions on who to investigate and who to ignore were not always based on pure evidence but on a complex web of geopolitical interests. For Niger and its allies, this meant they could never be sure if an ICC investigation was genuine justice or a politically motivated attack on their government. This uncertainty, he explained, was destabilizing and unacceptable. In closing, Niger's message was a call for fundamental reform. The withdrawal wasn't just an act of protest, it was a demand for a complete overhaul of the system. "We do not reject the idea of international justice," he clarified. "We reject this version of it." He stated Niger would be open to rejoining a future international court that was truly universal, one where all nations, big and small, were held to the same standard. Until that day, however, Niger would place its faith in African-led solutions, like the African Court on Human and People's Rights, and in the new partnership with its Sahel neighbors to ensure peace, security, and justice on their own terms. Finally, the leader of Burkina Faso came to the podium. His tone was resolute. He was explaining the simple, unavoidable logic behind the decision. He echoed the sentiments of his allies from Mali. He echoed the sentiments of his allies from Niger. He emphasized self-determination. He emphasized the specific path Burkina Faso was forging. He invoked the spirit of Ouagadougou. He referenced the revolutionary history of the nation. He spoke of breaking free from external dependencies. Leaving the ICC was framed as an extension of that spirit. International institutions like the ICC had noble intentions, but they often imposed a one-size-fits-all model that didn't fit African realities. Justice is not a product you can export. Justice must grow from the soil of the nation. It must understand our cultures. It must understand our traditions. It must follow our unique paths to reconciliation. Burkina Faso is committed to addressing past challenges. Burkina Faso is committed to addressing present challenges. This includes crimes from its political upheavals and the ongoing insurgency. It will handle these through its legal systems and through traditional systems. He addressed fears that leaving the ICC shields human rights abusers. He forcefully rejected that claim. He framed withdrawal as strengthening national accountability. Justice from a distant court in Europe often felt alien, foreign prosecutors, foreign judges. True justice is seen and understood by the people it affects. Outsourcing justice to the ICC is an abdication of national responsibility. He made a closing appeal to African unity. He rejected humanitarian paternalism. The era of Africa waiting for saviors is over. We will be the architects of our own peace and guarantors of our own justice. Leaving the ICC was a painful but necessary breakup. It was like ending a long-term relationship. Burkina Faso and its Sahel partners are moving on, investing energy to build a future where Africans define and deliver justice for Africans. The announcement at UNGA80 landed like a rock in a calm pond, and the ripples went everywhere. The reactions were, let's just say, mixed. On one side you had human rights organizations. Groups like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch immediately issued statements warning this was a major blow to international justice. They said it would leave victims with no path to recourse and could create a justice-free zone in an already violent Sahel. For them, it was a step backward for accountability. Among Western governments, Europe, North America, the response was official regret. To really understand why Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso broke up with the ICC, you have to look at the backstory. And trust me, it's complicated. This isn't a decision they made overnight. It's the result of years of simmering tensions, historical baggage, and a dramatic shift in the political landscape of the Sahel region. First, let's talk about France. As the former colonial power, France has maintained a huge amount of political, economic, and military influence in the region for decades. For a long time, France was the main security partner in their fight against jihadist insurgencies. But that relationship has completely soured. Military juntas have taken power in all three countries, and a huge part of their appeal has been an anti-French stance. They accused France of failing to defeat insurgents, despite a decade-long presence, and of meddling in internal politics to protect its own interests. They kicked out the French ambassador, terminated military agreements, sent French troops packing. They welcomed new partners, most notably Russia, which offers security assistance with fewer strings attached, especially on democracy and human rights. This pivot from the West is crucial. The ICC is widely seen as a Western-dominated institution. Breaking ties with the ICC fits the broader move away from Western influence. If you're kicking out French soldiers, rejecting the court makes political sense. It proves anti-imperialist credentials to domestic audiences and signals sovereignty to the world. So what happens now these three countries have stormed out of the ICC's party? Crossroads: International Justice versus National Sovereignty. It deals a significant blow to the court's credibility and its claim to universal jurisdiction. For the people living in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the future is uncertain. The leaders promise homegrown justice, but what that looks like remains to be seen. The region is in the middle of a brutal conflict: insurgent state security forces, allied militias. Without the oversight of the ICC, there's a real danger that impunity will flourish. National courts are often underfunded and susceptible to political pressure. Can they hold powerful military figures accountable? Human rights activists are rightly worried that victims will be left with nowhere to turn. This move also sends a powerful signal to other countries in Africa and beyond. It could embolden other nations to challenge or withdraw from international institutions. We are seeing a world becoming more multipolar, with different power centers competing for influence. The Sahel states' exit from the ICC is a symptom of this larger trend. It's a rejection of the post-Cold War, Western-led rules-based order in favor of a more fragmented world where regional blocs and national interests come first. This could have huge implications for international law, trade, security. In the end, this story is about more than just a court. It's about power, history, and the very definition of justice. The dream of a single universal court holding the world's worst criminals to account is a beautiful one. But if that court is perceived as a tool of the powerful, it will lose its legitimacy. The challenge now, for both Africa and the world, is to figure out what comes next. Can the ICC reform itself to become the truly impartial court it was meant to be? Or will we see the rise of regional justice systems? The one thing that's clear is that the conversation about global justice just got a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting.